Hello friends, Adam here with FED. Now my dislike for Fire Emblem Sacred Stones and the GBA games in general has come up recently, and I want to talk about it again. I've talked about it a lot in the past, but I don't think I've really ever hit on the thing that makes me dislike these games the most. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff that I dislike in these games. We're going to finish with the thing that bothers me the most. Like, absolutely cannot stand about these games. These games being Binding Blade, Blazing Sword, and Sacred Stones. They all have this same core issue. But before we get into it, please consider subscribing. Help us reach 25,000 subscribers. We're trying to get there before the end of the year. So if you wouldn't mind subscribing, helping us reach that goal, I'd really appreciate it. So, a lot of the gameplay innovations that we're seeing in FE4 and FE5, those being Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776, are absent in the Binding Blade, and then even up until like Sacred Stones adds a couple of things back in with like a couple of skills, and branching promotions is cool, I guess, but it's still missing out on a lot of the core things that make Fire Emblem interesting in those two titles that came before. And the first few things are just like more nitpicky, like Capture. I'd love if Capture would have stayed in some capacity, but really Capture is just like a really good narrative device in Thracia 776. It shows that the player is always on the back foot. They don't have enough money to buy their own weapons, so they have to capture enemy soldiers and steal their stuff, So that's like a cool thing that works there, and I understand you don't really need that in every game. Skills, I think skills are a large thing, and look at Fire Emblem now. It's all about abilities and skills and like combat arts and all this stuff that make units unique and different, and that is a large thing that was missing from the GBA games until you get to Sacred Stones, where they add, Pierce, Great Shield, whatever they're called. But it's not enough to me. It's not enough skills that they add, and they're not like every character really only gets one, right? If they even get one, so. Again, more nitpicky things. Easy to read stat screens. I feel like FE5 really nailed the stat screen. You don't have to like switch pages really at all unless you want to see some like ancillary stuff. Like movement stars and weapon ranks and stuff. But if you're just trying to check an enemy unit really fast to see like their attack speed and their attack stat, all that different stuff, it's just like one button press, you see it all, and the one button press to leave. Whereas with the GBA games, it's a button press to go into their menu. You want to see what weapon they're using. You have to move over 3 pages. You want to see their, see their con, and then you have to go back to the weapon to see attack speed, and it's all this different stuff. It's tedious and annoying. A lot of switching. A lot of times the game maybe I'm just an idiot, and maybe I don't like using my brain or something, but I just like that it's all on the same screen on NES, the Super Nintendo titles, and you get a lot of information on that stat screen, right? But the GBA games make you do a lot of page turning, and it just is frustrating. It doesn't feel good to do, in my opinion. And I understand it's a limitation of the hardware. You're working with a GBA screen. It's a small screen. You don't have a lot of space, a lot of real estate to put stuff there. But it's still, regardless of it being a limitation, and maybe like you think like don't judge it for that, it doesn't change that the problem is still there. The problem doesn't go away just because you say, oh, but it's a limitation. Well, yeah, it's a limitation that they worked with. I get it, but it's still annoying, especially looking back at it with a more modern perspective. I think the difficulty of the GBA games really suffers, especially 7 and 8. Those games are pretty easily solved by just throwing 1 or 2 really strong units at a horde of enemies and just like pressing the speed up button on your Nintendo Microsoft 370. But FE6, I will say, does have a bit more of a challenge. On lower difficulties, it does have the same issue, I think, but once you get to hard mode on that game, it's not quite as easily solved by just like 1 or 2 units. But the biggest thing, the biggest problem I have with the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem titles is this: unit uniqueness. Unit uniqueness, or character uniqueness if you want to say it that way. When I say unit, I mean gameplay wise. I'm not talking about as far as their supports or stories go, because honestly the GBA games did a lot to further character development with supports and all that. That's really cool. That's just not why I play Fire Emblem. you know. So some people are really into all the supports in Sacred Stones, and they have their favorite characters, and they'll say that Sacred Stones has their favorite cast or whatever. But I just don't care about that stuff, so it just misses me. It just misses me on that. It's my personal gameplay experience. Uniqueness, as far as gameplay goes, is incredibly important to my experience with Fire Emblem. So every unit just kind of feels the same in the Game Boy Advance titles. Any difference that there is between one unit or another basically boils down to whether or not they get to use a good weapon type or they're stuck with swords and bows, right? And stats are so variable that they don't really matter that much when comparing units. But the thing is, that's like the only thing to compare, so that's what we do, you know? Like, there isn't really any reason to use Barter over Dorcas or vice versa, besides the fact that, like, one of them is slightly faster than the other, right? There's no reason to use, like, Urk when Pent and Canas exist, and that's just because Urk just isn't as easy to use as Pent or Canas, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe Canas is a less of a good example, but Pent for sure. And then you look at, like, Ellen from FE6, who's this early game healer, but she becomes pointless once you get Clarine, who is literally like the same unit, but with more move. These units lose out on so much potential uniqueness by the game being so boiled down to the basics. FE5 handled this really well, and FE4 as well, by adding skills, which we talked about already, but they also had like unique weapons for all sorts of characters. FE4 in particular, I really liked holy weapons. I thought that was really cool. FE5 took it a step further, though, where you even have characters that don't even seem that important, you know, to the overall plot, that have like some sort of weapon that's theirs, right? Or they have some sort of unique skill that's theirs. I was going to mention Marita, but I understand that she's kind of a main-ish character, but after her like subplot is done, she's not really that important, right? But she gets a super cool, awesome sword. Think of like Galzus, you know, he has Luna and Astro. That's like a funny, cool combination for someone to have, right? It's just cool stuff like that make units unique. And FE5 takes it a step further even with like movement stars, which I know some people don't like movement stars, but I think they call them vigor stars in the newer translation patch and stuff. Vigor stars, which just make it so a unit can literally like have two actions in the same turn, but it's like dependent on how many stars you have. It's like a percentage chance of it happening. The highest is like 25, I think. 25% chance of it happening. So it's not something you can rely on. Usually it's just kind of a waste of a turn, but it's still fun. And then there's FCM, or follow-up critical modifier, that makes units unique as well, where you have like Shiva. No, that's a bad example. I can't think of his number. You have like Matcha, who has an FCM of 3, and with that FCM of 3, it means that whenever she doubles an enemy, and she's really fast, so she's going to double most enemies, with a killing edge, she's going to automatically crit on her second attack. And you have like Fergus, who has like a 5. I think his FCM is 5. So even with like a rapier, he's going to crit on his second attack every time. Stuff like that makes them really cool and unique. And now I know judging the GBA games against games that came out later is a little unfair, but it's just to illustrate the point that units feel the same. But like Awakening had different class sets for reclassing. Fates introduced personal skills to further make units feel different. And 3 houses even had unique combat arts and abilities, and essentially just giving each individual unit a different kit to work with. You know, I made a video about Petra versus Leone, and you look at their stats and stuff, and you're like, oh, it's the same unit, whatever. But once you look at their personal abilities and their unique abilities and unique combat arts, they become so unique. So different from each other, and their roles become completely different in your army. And I think that's really cool. So that's just the biggest thing for me. Units don't feel unique. I don't care about using any unit over another for any particular reason in the GBA games. Finally, I just want to say that because of all this, the GBA games are just a huge step back from anything that we got in the earlier days of Fire Emblem with like FE4 and 5, and even FE3 I think had some interesting ideas that were missed out on in the GBA games. But it held the series so far back that it took the series like 8 or 9 entries to get to the point that FE5 was at in the 90s. It wasn't until you got to Awakening or Fates that units felt unique again and were... I don't know. You can make an argument for the Tellius units being unique and stuff, but not really. I mean, what's the difference between Mia and Edward? Or Mia and Zahark? It's like, not a lot, really. Right? They just have like a different personal skill or whatever, but you can even just take that off and give it to someone else if you want. The way skill shifting works in Radiant Dawn. And Path of Radiance is even worse about that, too. So... not about the switching skills, but like the unit uniqueness. So it just took a long time for the series to get back to what FE5 already kind of established as like, yeah, units can be the same class, same weapon type, but they're still going to feel different from each other. Orson or Ojin or Osane or Ojane, however you say his name now. Orson's going to be different from Halvin. He just is. Even though they're the exact same class. They just feel completely different. So... yeah, those are my thoughts. I guess enough rambling. That was a lot of me just kind of going off on these games that I know people love, but for some reason I just don't like them as much. But please consider liking the video if you also like the GBA games or don't like the GBA games. Either way, just like the video. It helps. Please comment your thoughts. Do you like the GBA games? And if you do, tell us why. I would love to hear why you like them. And if you don't like them, feel free to... tell me why too. I don't care. Just tell me what you think of them. And of course, subscribe. Help us reach 25,000 subs. Really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, friends. I'll catch you next time.